play right, cause they can't miss. All about the game, that's a cold switch. Serving up the truth, call it ruthless. Tune in and get your fix from Blake and Vish Sports.
But who did you have, Vish?
Yeah, so I'm going to go way out on a limb and take a guy that I think is an emerging star in the NFL that doesn't get talked about enough. And I'm going to pick a guy from a team that I don't think people are even talking about much. And I'm going to go to the Carolina Panthers, and I'm picking Brian Burns. I think Brian Burns is going to be the defensive player of the year next year. I think he's going to emerge next year. So he's had a 7.5 sack season and 9.5 sack season, right? Sacks aren't the most efficient way to judge edge rusher play. You and I have ad nauseum beat that dead horse. But the point is that he's a phenomenal pass rusher. I mean, the quickness, his bend, his ability to get around people around the edge. It's Von Miller-esque. I won't say it's Von Miller, but it's Von Miller-esque. Brian Burns is a special football player. He's a special edge rusher. He creates havoc. And I think this year is the year that we're going to see Brian Burns become a national star. People are going to start acknowledging him. Maybe similar to how Jesse Bates was acknowledged this year. It might be on a bad team, but I think that's what's going to happen to Brian Burns. And the reason I took Brian Burns as Defensive Player of the Year, if you look at Burns stylistically in his ability to rush the passer, he is a guy capable of getting 18 to 20 sacks in a season. Like, because you look at you look at the Bosa brothers, right? The way the Bosa brothers get sacks, even though they're consistently good at getting pressure, they're both phenomenal football players. They're both two of the best edge rushers in the league. They are guys that to me will max out at getting 12 to 13 sacks. They just don't have that upper echelon athleticism and closing speed to get, the 17, 18 sacks. Brian Burns is capable of doing the Von Miller where he might get a sack half a second into a play because he's so explosive and his edge is so his bend around the edge is so freaky.
It's elite.
Because of that, I think Brian Burns is going to lead the league in sacks next year. And I think by leading the league in sacks, and the Carolina Panthers being a moderately decent team, though they have the potential to be better, I'm just not the most bullish on Sam Darnold. I think Brian Burns will be Defensive Player of the Year.
Interesting. Yeah, I think you mentioned like the bend and the Von Miller-esque play. I think that was something that was highlighted at Florida State, and that's why he went so high. And he was one of the few guys in that class that had a lot of edge rushers. They had Gary, Ja'Kai Polite, if you remember him, who, although he
fell down,
he fell to the third round, which was crazy. He didn't even make it. He didn't play a game. Crazy. But yeah, I mean, you look at Brian Burns, even from then, and he had elite I guess, Von Miller is really the only way to put it. Now, he's not as good as Von Miller that he has a lot to prove to even get close to that level after what we've seen Von Miller does. But, yeah, his bend does remind you of it. And I guess the point you were trying to make or were making is that, like, you're able to get there faster. And, yeah, when you're coming off the edge and you can just kind of duck and get around the tackle, like, you're right there in his pocket. And he has that ability. He's incredibly fast. And yeah, I mean, the Panthers being a better team can only kind of help him with that, and he needs that. But yeah, I think his only weakness is probably would be against the run, and he could be better in that regard. But I feel like that doesn't really matter as much for defensive players.
No, people don't judge
mostly sacks.
Yeah, people don't judge the completeness of a defensive player because there's guys that get 8 sacks in a season but are completely dominant for the entire season as defensive players. And for whatever reason, it doesn't get talked about. And Burns also has that move that Von Miller really popularized. Khalil Mack used it a little bit. It's called the ghost step, and he is nasty with it. And I think Brian Burns, and even you talked about the run defense. I think his weight and his strength at the point of attack was a concern when he came out of college. It has gotten better from when he came out of college to where he is now. So I'm assuming that improves. He gets a bit stronger again this offseason, takes another step, and we're going to see Brian Burns really, really become a national name next year.
Awesome.
Yeah, so you picked Myles Garrett, which probably would have been my pick too, but we both wanted to go Aaron Donald for defensive player. You went Myles Garrett, and I went Brian Burns.